I stood in my own kitchen, a spatula in hand, as my daughter called me broke, like it was a joke we both were supposed to laugh at. The butter hissed in the pan, the smell of breakfast turning sour in the quiet that followed. She scrolled on her phone, earbuds dangling, sunlight catching the smirk on her face. "Retirement suits you, Mom," she'd said, broke and quiet. By the end of the week, she'd learn how loud silence can be, especially when it's paid for in full. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The smell of sizzling butter filled the kitchen, soft and warm like the morning light that leaked through the blinds. Carolyn cracked the last egg into the pan and watched the yolk bloom gold against the cast iron. It hissed quietly, one small sound in a house that had grown too used to silence. Behind her, the couch creaked. Rachel lay sprawled across it, earbuds dangling, one sock off, the other foot bouncing in rhythm to some viral sound. TikTok clips fluttered from her phone, laughter and pop music spilling into the calm. Carolyn had learned to tune them out, the quick-cut chaos of her daughter's world. "Morning," Carolyn said. She kept her voice level, careful, the way she used to speak to restless students before the bell rang. Rachel didn't look up. "It's almost noon." Carolyn plated the eggs, slid two onto her daughter's plate even though she knew they'd go cold. She set down the fork gently. "I thought we could eat together." Rachel finally glanced up, squinting into the sunlight. Her hair was a lazy knot, half pinned with a pen. She grinned, not kindly. "Retirement suits you, Mom. Broken quiet." The words hit harder than they should have. The fork trembled slightly in Carolyn's hand, a thin, metallic sound as it grazed the plate. She steadied it, exhaled through her nose. Rachel smirked, took a sip of iced coffee, the straw squeaking in its lid. "Kidding," she said, though she wasn't. Carolyn watched the condensation slide down the plastic cup and form a small ring on the tablecloth. She wanted to wipe it, but instead, she turned back to the stove, scraped at the skillet, let the rhythm of the motion keep her from saying anything foolish. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands and glanced down. "Heather, Rachel's college balance is still unpaid. You're handling it, right?" The words pulsed at her from the screen, gentle but sharp, like Heather always was. Carolyn's chest tightened, not with guilt, but with something quieter, older. Responsibility, expectation, all the invisible weights she'd carried long past her turn. Rachel was laughing now, loud, unfiltered, the kind of laugh people used when they didn't expect to pay for anything. "What's funny?" Carolyn asked. Rachel tilted her phone toward her. "This guy just quit his job on livestream. He said, 'I'm free, losers.'" She wiped a tear of laughter. "I'd love to feel that level of freedom someday." Carolyn nodded slowly, though the word freedom settled differently in her ears. To Rachel, it meant skipping work, ignoring bills. To Carolyn, it meant the right to stop giving pieces of herself away. "You could start by doing your FAFSA paperwork," Carolyn said gently. "Deadlines." "Ugh, I know." Rachel rolled her eyes. "You handle that stuff better, Mom. You always do." "I won't always." Rachel hummed distractedly, scrolling again. Carolyn turned off the stove and stared at the empty counter. The sunlight had shifted, painting the walls with thin gold stripes. The kitchen felt smaller, crowded not with people, but with unspoken things. She rinsed the pan, water hissing against hot iron. Over the running stream, Rachel spoke again. "You should get out more. You're like officially retired now. Don't just sit around doing puzzles or whatever." Carolyn smiled faintly, unseen. "Maybe I will." "Sure," Rachel said, already lost in her phone again. "You'd need money for that, though." Carolyn shut off the water, her hands still damp. She watched her reflection shimmer on the faucet, her own face blurred, silvered, unfamiliar. There was a time she would have argued, explained, reminded Rachel where every dollar came from. But not today. She dried her hands and walked to the table. Rachel's eggs had cooled, untouched. "Eat before class," Carolyn said. "Mm-hmm." Carolyn lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for something. An apology, a glance, a spark of awareness. But the only sound was another burst of canned laughter from Rachel's phone. She picked up her own plate and carried it to the sink. Through the window, the gulf shimmered faintly beyond the palms, soft and endless. "Retirement suits you," Rachel had said. Broke and quiet. Maybe she was right about one of those things. Carolyn looked down at her phone again. Heather's message still open, waiting for a reply. Instead of answering, she tapped the screen dark and set it face down on the counter. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She sat at the table, hands folded, letting the house go still. A single thought crept in, clear and precise as sunlight through glass. If they think I'm done, maybe it's time to prove it. She looked toward the closed door, where Rachel's laughter was fading down the hallway, and smiled just once. Thin, knowing. The morning air was sharp with salt and humidity when Carolyn stepped out of her house. The palm fronds clacked faintly in the breeze, the gulf glimmering like a promise 2 blocks away. She locked the front door and stood still for a moment, the key warm in her palm. She hadn't walked to the bank in months. Rachel usually handled the errands that required driving, but the air felt good in her lungs. Clearwater was waking up around her. Joggers with earbuds, retirees walking dogs, the faint smell of sunscreen already drifting from the direction of the beach. By the time she reached the bank, the automatic doors sighed open with the familiar whoosh of air conditioning and quiet wealth. The lobby was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish. She smoothed her blouse, the one she'd ironed this morning without quite knowing why, and headed toward the row of glass cubicles. "Morning, Ms. Lane." Dee Coleman looked up from her desk, her glasses catching the light. She'd known Carolyn for 20 years, long enough to have watched her cash checks for field trips, Christmas bonuses, and later, her husband's pension. Dee's smile was easy and respectful, the kind reserved for someone who had always kept her balances neat. "Well, if it isn't retirement royalty," Dee teased, "how's the quiet life treating you?" Carolyn smiled faintly. "Quieter every day." Dee motioned her in. "Have a seat. What can I do for you?" Carolyn sat, folding her purse in her lap. The chair was cold against her arms. "I need to make a withdrawal." "Sure thing." Dee typed something on her keyboard, the screen reflection flickering in her lenses. "From checking or savings?" Carolyn hesitated, then said, "Neither. From the college fund." Dee paused, hands stilling over the keys. "The 529? For Rachel?" Carolyn nodded. Dee's smile wavered. "Still got that sitting untouched. You've managed it perfectly all these years." The compliment landed oddly, like a pat on the shoulder for a task she no longer valued. Carolyn leaned forward slightly. "Can I liquidate it?" Dee blinked, the question hanging there between them. "Liquidate, as in close it entirely?" "Yes." Dee's brows knit. "You sure there'll be taxes, penalties, and, well, Rachel's still enrolled, right?" Carolyn's voice was even. "She's sure I'm broke. Let's make it real." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the soft hum of the printer behind them. Dee studied her, searching her expression for a hint of a joke. When she didn't find one, her professional mask slid back into place. "Well," Dee said slowly, "you've got about 41,000, give or take a little interest. I'll need a few signatures." Carolyn nodded once. "Print them." As the forms emerged, the machine made a rhythmic clicking that filled the silence. Dee passed the first page across the desk. Carolyn took the pen, her fingers steady now, and began to sign. Signature after signature, Each stroke felt like reclaiming something small but vital. Years of saving for someone else's future, carved from her own paychecks and skipped vacations, all reduced to neat black ink on white paper. You really don't want to think this over? Dee asked gently. You've always been careful. Carolyn looked up, eyes clear. Still am. Dee studied her again, then gave a slow nod. All right then. It's your account. The printer spat out the final receipt. Carolyn folded it neatly and slid it into her purse. The number, $41,300, burned in her mind like a quiet revelation. Outside, the sunlight was harsher, almost dazzling. She squinted as she stepped onto the sidewalk, her shadow stretching thin behind her. The bank door closed with a sealed hush, and the world sounded wider, freer. She walked without hurry, feeling the weight of her purse, of the receipt, of the years she'd just signed away. A pelican swept low across the sky toward the water, unhurried, unbothered. At the corner, a bus sighed to a stop. Its advertisement showed a smiling family in cruise wear, tanned, wind-blown, blissful. The tagline read, "Life's short. Sail now." Carolyn caught herself smiling. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe something else. She walked past the stop, her pulse steady but strong. When she reached the corner bakery, she ducked inside for a cup of coffee she didn't need. The cashier greeted her with a cheery, "Good morning," and for the first time in years, she ordered whipped cream on top. As she stirred the cup, she pulled the folded receipt from her purse and smoothed it flat on the table. The numbers looked like a secret waiting to be spent. Outside the window, the Gulf sparkled like possibility. She took a sip, the coffee rich and sweet, and whispered to herself, "Let's see what broke really looks like." The cruise agency sat between a nail salon and a bait shop, two doors Carolyn had never opened in her life. The window display was an aging poster of turquoise water and a couple mid-laugh, drinks raised against a sunset. "Life is better on deck," the faded print declared. Inside, the air was faintly citrus, the kind of scent meant to suggest adventure without leaving land. Maps lined the walls, glossy brochures fanned out like treasure. Behind the counter, a man with salt and pepper hair and a bright linen shirt looked up from his computer. "Morning," he said, his voice rich with practiced warmth. "Welcome to Gulf Star Voyages. I'm Miles." Carolyn hesitated a moment in the doorway, purse clasped to her chest. "Hi, was just looking." "Good start," Miles said with an easy smile. "Where to? Caribbean? Alaska? Maybe one of those floating cities with more restaurants than Clearwater has people?" She almost laughed. Almost. "Something warm. Something quiet." He studied her for a second, then gestured toward a spread of mid-range brochures. "Here's our comfort line. Balcony cabins, good buffets, karaoke if you're feeling bold." Carolyn scanned the images. Families in matching shirts, retirees in sun hats, couples in identical polos. She shook her head. Her gaze drifted higher to a single binder on a shelf behind him. Thick, dark blue leather, gold letters embossed across the spine. "Premier Ocean Suites." "That one," she said, pointing. Miles glanced over his shoulder. "That's our luxury catalog. Bit pricier." Carolyn's tone didn't waver. "Oceanfront suite, balcony, champagne." He turned back to her, one brow arched, something like admiration flickering behind his expression. "You don't mess around, Ms. Lane. Carolyn Lane." "Well, Ms. Lane," he said, sliding the leather binder onto the counter. "If you're after quiet, you'll find it here. These rooms come with private decks, butlers, and champagne that doesn't taste like a dare." He opened to a photo. An ocean view, the horizon unbroken. Carolyn's breath caught. She could almost hear the waves already. Miles leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like a secret. "These are for people who've earned their freedom. That you?" Carolyn met his eyes. I'm working on it. He grinned, tapping the photo. Then let's see what freedom costs this week. While he typed, she looked around the small office. Souvenirs on the wall, a photo of Miles shaking hands with a ship captain, a paperweight shaped like a conch. Something about his ease calmed her. When he turned the screen toward her, she didn't flinch at the number. I'll take it, she said. He blinked. That's the full suite. You sure you don't want to think it over? I've already thought about everything else, she said simply. He leaned back, smiling now, a little charmed, a little impressed. All right then, let's make it official. That afternoon, Carolyn met Inez at the discount outlet near the highway, the one with flickering lights and endless racks of clearance tags. You're taking a cruise? Inez's voice was equal parts disbelief and delight. Carolyn nodded, pushing hangers aside. Oceanfront suite, balcony, champagne. Inez let out a low whistle. You're not easing into retirement, you're hitting it like a wave. They laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in a long while. Inez pulled a coral sundress off a rack. This one screams I've stopped apologizing. Carolyn held it to her front, smiled at the mirror. Good. I'm done whispering. By the time they left, Carolyn's trunk was full of sale-bin treasures, wide-brimmed hats, a linen wrap, sandals that sparkled more than they needed to. The late afternoon light slanted low across the lot, gilding the asphalt. When Carolyn stepped back into the house, the spell broke. Rachel's voice carried from the living room, sharp and irritated. Mom, the Wi-Fi's out again. Carolyn set her bags down quietly, the plastic rustling. Rachel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, phone in hand. The bill's overdue. I can't even finish my essay like this. You could write offline, Carolyn said softly. That's not how it works, Rachel snapped. Seriously, Mom, what do you even do all day? You're retired. Can't you handle one thing? Carolyn looked at her, really looked, and something inside her settled. Calm, not anger. Rachel didn't see the ocean dress folded in one of those bags, or the ticket she'd soon hold. I'll handle it, Carolyn said, her tone even. Rachel huffed and stomped back down the hall, muttering. Carolyn stood alone in the entryway, the last bit of sunlight catching the edge of her reflection in the hall mirror. She lifted her chin, brushed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. Morning broke pale and clear over clear water, the kind of light that made the Gulf look endless. Carolyn stood at her kitchen counter, the cruise brochure open beside her coffee. The glossy pages caught the sun like a mirror. Turquoise, water, white decks, linen dresses fluttering in salt wind. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Dee. Funds transferred to checking. All set. She stared at the words for a moment before setting the phone down. That quiet phrase, all set, felt heavier than it should. At the bank, Dee greeted her again, a knowing smile behind her glasses. Everything's cleared. Funds are liquid. You've got the full amount available now. Thank you, Carolyn said, sliding her ID back into her wallet. Dee leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. You ever going to tell me what this is all for? Carolyn gave a small, almost conspiratorial smile. Maybe when I'm back? Dee laughed. Back from where? But Carolyn was already turning toward the door, her purse a little heavier now, not from cash, but from the decision itself. Miles looked up from behind the cruise agency counter as the door chimed. Ms. Lane, he said, grinning. Was just wondering if I'd scared you off with all those fancy brochures. Hardly, she said, setting her purse on the counter. I'm here to pay. He raised an eyebrow. Pay? We can do a deposit first. You've got time to... Carolyn unzipped her purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it neatly in front of him. Miles blinked, his humor faltering for the first time. That's... cash? It is. He exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. You're full of surprises. He opened the envelope, counting quickly, then looked up. Paid in full. I don't get many of those. Consider me an exception. He leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. You know what, Ms. Lane? I'm upgrading you. VIP tier, private concierge, top deck dining, the whole works. Carolyn arched an eyebrow. You don't have to do that. Oh, I want to. You've got what we call the fun energy. She smiled. A real one this time. Haven't heard that in a while. Miles slid a thick confirmation packet toward her and offered a pen. The air hummed faintly with the sound of his computer printing the final receipt. As she signed, the door swung open and Inez breezed in, sunglasses perched on her head. There you are. I wanted to see this with my own eyes. Miles grinned. You must be the friend she mentioned. Guilty. Inez clasped her hands as Carolyn finished the last signature. Look at you, paying for a cruise like a woman with no apologies left. Carolyn pressed her pen to the final line. Maybe that's exactly what I am. The printer spat out the last page, the ink still warm when she took it. Inez gave a delighted clap that turned a few heads. Now that's a retirement move. Carolyn tucked the receipt into her purse with the same care she'd once reserved for report cards and bills. But this paper was different. It didn't belong to anyone else. By the time she returned home, the house was humming with noise. Rachel's voice rang, sharp from the hallway. Mom, where's the FAFSA folder? Carolyn set her keys down, her pulse still calm from the drive. What? The folder with all my stuff? Social, income forms, everything. I need it for the financial aid resubmission. Rachel stomped into the living room, hair pulled back in a messy bun, her tone already accusatory. Did you move it again? Carolyn reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded brochure, the cruise line logo glinting faintly in gold. She handed it to her daughter. Rachel took it, frowning. What's this? Something you won't need a FAFSA for? For a second, Rachel looked confused. Then her eyes narrowed as she flipped through the pages. You're joking. No. Rachel laughed, a single disbelieving sound. You spent my college money on a vacation? Carolyn's tone didn't change. I spent my money on peace. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. When she found none, she stormed toward her room, muttering curses that bounced down the hall. Carolyn stayed where she was, the silence blooming in Rachel's wake. Through the open window, she could hear the distant rhythm of waves against the shore. She picked up the brochure Rachel had thrown onto the floor. It was creased now, but the photo still shimmered, an endless sea under a gold horizon. She smoothed the paper carefully with her palm. Her phone buzzed. Your reservation is confirmed, Ms. Lane. Welcome aboard. Carolyn looked at the message, a small spark lighting in her chest. Rachel's voice tore through the quiet like a siren. Mom, you can't just take it. Carolyn didn't look up. She was at the kitchen table, a notepad open in front of her, the morning paper folded neatly beside it. Outside, the palm trees were still. The gulf shimmered through the blinds, indifferent to the chaos inside her house. Mom! Rachel's phone was on speaker. A second voice joined the storm. Heather's, sharp and commanding. Carolyn, what on earth is going on? Carolyn took a slow sip of coffee. Good morning to you too. Heather's tone cut through the static. Rachel just called me crying, saying you emptied her college account. Please tell me that's not true. Rachel spun toward her mother, eyes red, jaw trembling with outrage. Tell her, Mom. Tell her you didn't. Carolyn set the cup down carefully. It wasn't her account. Heather's voice hardened. It was for her education. It was under my name, Carolyn said. My savings, my discipline, my sacrifices. She never earned it. Rachel gaped, voice cracking. You said it was mine. Carolyn met her gaze calmly. I said it was for your future. You assumed that meant your college. Turns out I meant mine. Heather's tone sharpened through the speaker. That's cruel, Mom. Do you know what kind of message this sends? Carolyn's lips curved faintly. That I've stopped sending. Messages nobody reads. Rachel let out a small, wounded sound, the kind she used as a child when she fell from her bike. Half pain, half fury. You're punishing me for nothing. Carolyn leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. Nothing is exactly what you've contributed. Heather's voice rose. She's 19. She's figuring things out. She's 19, Carolyn replied, and she calls me broke while I pay for her Wi-Fi. Rachel slammed her hand against the counter. You're abusing me. The word hung there, ugly, rehearsed. Carolyn's calm didn't break. Then leave, she said softly. Rachel froze. What? Leave, Carolyn repeated. If living here is abuse, you're free to go. Heather's voice crackled through the phone, indignant. Mom, don't be ridiculous. She's your daughter. She's an adult, Carolyn said. Adults make choices. Rachel blinked rapidly, stunned. She'd expected anger, guilt, negotiation, but not this still, deliberate dismissal. Heather was still speaking, voice strained and tinny. Do you even hear yourself? You can't just… Carolyn pressed the phone's speaker icon. The call ended. Silence rushed in, filling every corner of the kitchen. Rachel stared at her, pale with disbelief. You hung up on her? Carolyn stood, pushing the chair back. I did. And now I'm going to print something you might find educational. Rachel followed her down the hallway, muttering, You've lost it, Mom. Carolyn ignored her and stopped by her small office, the room she'd once used to file permission slips and PTO memos. Now the desk was tidy, the computer humming softly. She sat down, clicked through a few secure pages, and logged into her account. Rachel hovered in the doorway. What are you doing? Carolyn didn't answer. The printer began to whir. The machine spat out a single page. Carolyn picked it up and turned it toward Rachel. Across the top, in neat black print, the account details were listed. Near the bottom, a line marked beneficiaries. Rachel Lane. Removed Heather Lane. Removed Carolyn placed the page neatly on the desk. That's what happens when people mistake generosity for obligation. Rachel's face drained of color. You can't. Carolyn stood, meeting her eye level for the first time in years. I already did. For a heartbeat, Rachel didn't move. Her chest rose and fell, breath shallow, her expression a flicker between shock and betrayal. You'll regret this. Carolyn smiled faintly. I've regretted plenty. Not this. Rachel turned, storming down the hall, slamming her bedroom door so hard the picture frames rattled. Carolyn didn't chase her. She sat back down, the printed paper warm in her hand, and watched the last bit of it feed out of the printer tray. The sound, the soft mechanical rhythm, was strangely satisfying, almost like applause. Through the open blinds, the Gulf wind shifted, carrying the faint call of seagulls. She placed the document in a manila folder, labeled it with her careful script, Final Edits. Then she turned off the printer, the screen dimming to black. The morning after the shouting, the air in the house felt thin. Carolyn could smell last night's coffee still in the pot, bitter and stale. Sunlight reached through the blinds in long, accusing stripes across the living room carpet. Rachel hadn't come out of her room. Not for dinner. Not for the sound of the news on low volume. Not even when Carolyn had quietly slid her plate into the fridge. The silence wasn't peace yet. It was waiting. Carolyn stood in the hallway, a canvas duffel at her feet. She opened Rachel's door without knocking. The room smelled like perfume and energy drinks, the cluttered chaos of someone who'd never learned to leave anything neatly behind. Posters curled on the walls. The dresser overflowed with tangled jewelry and half-used bottles of lotion. On the bed, college t-shirts, makeup palettes, and a pile of crumpled clothes she recognized from a week's worth of floor. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to fold, one shirt after another. University of South Florida, Go Bulls, senior class of 2023. Each one folded smooth and silent. She didn't rush. She packed like she used to grade papers. Methodical, detached. Halfway through, the front door creaked. "Carolyn?" Inez's voice carried down the hall, warm but cautious. "In here," Carolyn called back. Inez appeared in the doorway, sunglasses still on, hair pinned back with a bright clip. She took in the scene, the open drawers, the neat pile of clothes, and let out a low whistle. "You're really doing it." Carolyn nodded. "If she says she's being abused, I'll give her freedom from it." Inez crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You're tougher than you look, lady." Carolyn smiled faintly. "Not tough. Just done." They worked in companionable silence. Carolyn filled the duffel, zipped it shut with a clean, final sound. Inez grabbed a second tote. Rachel's shoes, hair dryer, the things she would claim were irreplaceable, and followed Carolyn to the porch. Outside, the morning had turned bright and windless. The Gulf air smelled of salt and sunscreen. Carolyn set the duffel by the wicker chair, adjusting the strap until it lay just so. "You want me to stick around?" Inez asked softly. Carolyn shook her head. "No. She needs to see I mean it. Alone." Inez touched her arm, a brief squeeze of support. "Call if you need me." "I won't," Carolyn said, but her voice held gratitude. Inez left, her sandals clicking down the sidewalk. The house felt cavernous again. Carolyn returned to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, hands steady. It took another 20 minutes before Rachel emerged. She looked rumpled, eyes puffy from crying. When she saw the duffel through the screen door, her expression hardened. "What is that?" "Your things," Carolyn said simply. "You packed my stuff?" "I did." Rachel's voice climbed an octave. "You can't just throw me out." "I didn't," Carolyn said. "It's all right there. Nothing thrown. Just moved." Rachel crossed her arms, nails digging into her elbows. "You'll regret this." Carolyn's answer came without pause. "I already do." For a heartbeat, Rachel looked almost unsure, like a little girl again, waiting for her mother to flinch. But Carolyn didn't move. The tension broke with the slam of the door. Rachel stormed outside, yanking the duffel off the chair so hard the zipper snagged. "I'm not staying here and taking this." Carolyn watched from the threshold. "That's the point." Rachel hoisted the bag over her shoulder, muttering curses under her breath. The morning light flashed off her phone screen as she typed furiously. At the edge of the walkway, she spun back toward the house, voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "You're seriously okay with this? With being alone?" Carolyn's tone was almost kind. "I was alone long before this, honey." Rachel's mouth tightened. Then she turned and walked away, sandals slapping the pavement, her figure shrinking against the brightness. The sound of the slamming car door was sharp, final. Then, nothing. Carolyn stood for a long time in the doorway. The breeze carried the faint rustle of palms, the cry of a gull somewhere near the bay. Inside, the clock ticked like a heartbeat she could finally hear. She closed the door gently, locking it out of habit, and turned toward the stillness that followed. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The morning of her departure rose soft and gold, the kind of Florida morning that made the world look forgiving. Carolyn stood in the center of her kitchen, suitcase by the door, the air still carrying the faint scent of last night's lemon cleaner. The house was spotless. Surfaces cleared, blinds open, everything she owned folded into its place. She peeled a small yellow sticky note from the pad and pressed it to the refrigerator door. Fridge is full. House is clean. You're on your own. The handwriting was tidy and unhurried, the same way she'd written passes and permission slips for 30 years. But there was something final about the way her pen lifted after that last line, a quiet stroke that meant, done. She stepped back to look at it once, then turned toward the hall. The sound of the clock ticking filled the space, steady and certain. In her bedroom, sunlight spilled across the open suitcase. A floral tote rested beside it, packed neatly with the same precision she'd once used to balance her budget. Linen dress folded, coral pendant tucked into its small velvet pouch. The cruise documents in a manila envelope marked Lane C. She zipped both bags closed and ran her palm along the suitcase handle. The motion steadied her, reminded her she was still solid, still here. Outside, a horn beeped, short, friendly. Inez's little blue sedan gleamed at the curb, its dashboard covered with sun-faded postcards. Carolyn pulled the front door closed behind her and locked it. The key turned easily, no hesitation. Inez rolled down her window. "You packed light," she said, smiling. Carolyn lifted the tote into her lap. "Turns out I didn't need much." Inez leaned over and opened the passenger door. "You ready for the big escape?" "I'm not running away," Carolyn said. "I'm just leaving correctly this time." The drive to the marina wound along Gulfview Boulevard, the water glinting through palms and white fences. The breeze whipped through the open windows, carrying the salt and faint scent of sunscreen. "Rachel call yet?" Inez asked. Carolyn's phone vibrated in her hand before she could answer. The screen filled with messages. "You can't just leave, where are you?" "Mom, answer me right now." "I'm calling Heather." "You're insane then." Finally. 12 more in all caps, each more frantic than the last. Carolyn scrolled once, then pressed block contact. The silence that followed was pure. Inez glanced over. "That felt good, didn't it?" Carolyn smiled faintly, like shutting off a leaky faucet. They didn't speak for a while after that. The hum of the car, the rhythmic slap of waves against the pier beyond the windshield, it was enough. When they pulled into the marina lot, the morning was alive with motion. Dock hands rolled carts of luggage. Gulls swooped low over the docks. The cruise ship, enormous and gleaming, waited like a city made of light. Miles stood near the gangway in his linen shirt, holding a clipboard and looking entirely too pleased to see her. "Well, well," he said as they approached. "I was starting to think you were a myth." "Not yet," Carolyn said, smiling. He lifted a bottle of champagne from a cooler at his feet, the label sweating in the sun. "VIP boarding perks. Wouldn't want to waste them." Inez laughed. "Look at you, Carolyn. Already a celebrity." Miles popped the cork with a soft thunk. Foam slid down the neck, fizzing in the sunlight. He poured a glass and handed it to her. "To first voyages," he said. Carolyn took it, the bubbles tickling her wrist. "And last goodbyes." Inez hugged her, tight, unspoken. "Send me a postcard," she whispered. "I'll send you two." As Inez walked back toward her car, Carolyn turned to the water. The Gulf shimmered like a mirror, endless and forgiving. She sipped her champagne, the taste bright and unfamiliar, like something new waiting to be named. Miles checked his watch. "They'll start boarding in a few minutes. You sure you're ready?" Carolyn looked out at the ship's white hull, at the sunlight scattering across its surface. "I've been ready for years." The ocean was a moving mirror, endless and blue, stitched with silver light. Carolyn leaned against the balcony rail of her suite, a linen robe tied loosely at her waist. The breeze lifted the ends of her hair, carrying the faint scent of salt and citrus from the ship's deck below. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps behind her, no voices calling her name from another room, no one asking where things were or what came next. just water. Endless, patient water. She exhaled. The sound came out like relief. A gull arced low across the wake, riding the air currents, then vanished into the horizon. Carolyn raised her coffee mug in salute. "Good for you," she murmured. Behind her, the suite glowed in soft light. Cream walls, a glass carafe of orange juice, orchids on the table. She'd slept better than she had in a decade. No interruptions, no guilt. Just the steady hum of the ship and the lullaby of waves. At lunch, the dining room gleamed like a dream someone had dared to make real. White linens, silver cutlery, the quiet clink of wine glasses. Carolyn sat alone at a window table, her back straight, a folded napkin in her lap. The waiter set down a plate. Filet mignon, charred perfectly, with butter pooling at the edges. "Anything else for you, Ms. Lane?" She smiled. "Just time." He nodded, leaving her to it. Through the glass, the sea spread out like satin. Every bite tasted of something she hadn't realized she'd been missing: attention. She took her time, watching the light play on the waves. That evening, she attended the ship's Broadway revue on a whim. The stage lights were gold and violet, dancers twirling in sequins. The orchestra swelled. Carolyn clapped, not because she was expected to, but because she wanted to. When the curtain fell, Miles appeared beside her aisle seat, his tie loosened, smile familiar. "I thought you'd skip the show," he said. "I thought so too," she admitted. He offered his arm, mock formal. "Come on, deck bar's better than this popcorn champagne." The night air outside was warm, humming with laughter and faint music. Lanterns swung over the pool deck, string lights looping between the railings. The sea stretched black and endless beyond the glass walls, a moving horizon of moonlight. Miles handed her a drink, something pale and sparkling. "You're glowing," he said. "Ship lighting," she said, smiling. He tilted his head. "No, that's you." Carolyn rolled her eyes, but there was no sharpness in it. "You flirt like a man who's had practice." "Only with women who look like they've finally exhaled," he said. She laughed softly, the sound surprising even her. "Careful, Miles, you're almost charming." He grinned. "Almost?" Music swelled from the poolside DJ, something soft and nostalgic, a modern remix of an old jazz tune. Couples began to sway under the lights. Miles extended a hand, half a dare. "Dance with me?" Carolyn hesitated. The last time she'd danced had been in her living room years ago, her husband alive, Rachel small enough to stand on her feet. But the music tugged gently, the air easy and forgiving. She took his hand. They moved slowly, her bare feet brushing the deck, the scent of salt and citrus surrounding them. Miles led, but not possessively. She let herself move with the rhythm, her laugh soft against the night. When the song ended, he leaned in, not close enough to cross a line, but near enough for her to feel the warmth of his voice. "You really don't look like someone who's broken quiet." Carolyn smiled. "Guess that's the trick, isn't it?" He raised his glass. "To new definitions." They clinked, the sound crisp and final against the music. Later, back in her suite, Carolyn changed into her robe again and stepped out onto the balcony. The stars scattered across the water like reflections of a better life. She took a photo, the ocean, the faint glow of the ship's lights, the hint of her hand in the frame, and sent it to Inez. A minute later, her phone buzzed with a reply, a selfie of Inez grinning in Carolyn's old recliner, a glass of wine in hand. "Your chair misses you." "I don't." Carolyn laughed quietly, the sound blending with the waves. The morning sun hit the waves like shattered glass. Carolyn sat on her balcony again, robe open at the collar, a cup of coffee balanced on the rail. Somewhere far below, the ship's engines thrummed, a sound she was beginning to find oddly comforting. Her phone pinged once, then again, then again. She sighed, slipped on her reading glasses, and checked the screen. The notifications were stacked like dominoes. Mentions, comments, tags, Rachel. Carolyn opened the first post. A photo. Rachel in her car, mascara streaked, eyes red, captioned in all caps, "My mother stole my college fund for a cruise." Beneath it, a thread of emojis, mockery, disbelief. Someone had reposted it with the caption, "Girl, she didn't steal it, she earned it." Another wrote, "If my mom did that, I'd probably deserve it too." By mid-morning, the post had gone viral enough to find its way into corners of the internet neither of them knew existed. Someone dug up an old photo of Carolyn, staff recognition day at the elementary school, her arm around a retiring teacher. They paired it with Rachel's crying selfie and captioned it, "The villain you made versus the woman who's finally resting." Carolyn couldn't help the small smile that touched her lips. The ocean wind caught the corner of her robe, fluttering it like a flag. Her phone buzzed again. This time, messages from old friends, women she hadn't heard from since the retirement luncheon. "Good for you, Carolyn, finally living for yourself. We should all be that brave." About time someone taught them gratitude. She chuckled quietly. "Queen Carolyn," one comment read. The nickname stuck. By evening, the ship staff had heard it too. At dinner, one of the bartenders winked as he set down her drink. "For Queen Carolyn," he said. "Extra lime." The daiquiri sparkled pale pink under the candlelight. She lifted it in salute. "Long live the Queen," she murmured. Later, as she strolled the promenade deck, Miles appeared beside her, jacket unbuttoned, the sea wind tugging at his shirt. "Your court awaits," he teased, nodding toward a group of passengers who had clearly recognized her from the post now circulating everywhere. "Florida Mom takes revenge cruise." Carolyn smirked. "Do I bow or just wave regally?" "Wave," he said, grinning. "Always wave. It hides the smirk." They walked together to the railing where the horizon glowed like molten gold. The ship rocked gently beneath them. Carolyn felt the weight of her phone in her pocket, the screen still buzzing every few minutes, but she didn't check it again. Miles handed her a second drink. "You okay with all this? Internet fame isn't for everyone." "I've been invisible most of my life," she said. "I'll survive being seen." He studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." He laughed softly. "Touché." When she finally did glance at her messages again, one name stood out. Heather. "You could have handled this better." No hello. No explanation. Just that. Carolyn typed slowly, deliberately. "I did. Finally." She hit send, set the phone face down, and turned back toward the railing. Down below, music was starting again near the pool, a late-night crowd gathering under the lights. Someone shouted, "Queen Carolyn, come dance!" And laughter rolled through the night air. Miles tilted his head toward the sound. "Your subjects beckon." "I think I'll grant them a dance," she said. They descended to the deck, the DJ spinning something bright and modern. The air smelled of salt and citrus, the same notes that had followed her since the first day aboard. People cheered when she joined in. Half irony, half admiration. Carolyn danced barefoot again, champagne in one hand, her laughter light enough to carry on the wind. When the song ended, Miles leaned against the railing beside her, eyes gleaming. "So, Queen Carolyn, want to hear something interesting?" She arched a brow. "Depends how interesting." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. "We ran a guest raffle last night. Random drawing from VIPs. He handed it to her with a grin. "You won." She frowned. Playfully. "Won what?" "Another cruise," he said. "Free. Any destination." Carolyn blinked, then laughed, a deep, surprised sound that startled even her. You're joking. He shook his head. Guess karma's got a sense of humor after all. She looked down at the envelope in her hand, the edges catching the deck lights. The ship swayed beneath her feet, gentle, rhythmic, like the beginning of something new. The next morning found Carolyn standing barefoot on the sand of a Bahamian cove, sunlight flashing off the water like polished glass. A snorkel mask hung around her neck, droplets sliding down her arms as she waded back to shore. For the first time in years, her heartbeat felt unburdened. No dread waiting at home, no tension threaded into every decision. She dried her hands on a towel and looked out toward the reef. Fish darted like bits of stained glass beneath the surface, the sea a patchwork of turquoise and shadow. A crewman offered her a bottle of cold water. Beautiful out there today, he said. Carolyn smiled. It always was. I just never looked long enough. Back on the ship, she signed up for a beachside massage that afternoon. The cabana was open to the sea breeze, the sound of waves lapping in rhythm with each exhale. She let her body sink into the table as the masseuse's hands worked quietly over her shoulders. Somewhere between the sound of surf and seagulls, she drifted into a half-sleep, the kind of rest that felt earned. When she returned to her suite, the air smelled faintly of lilies. She changed into a soft blue dress and sat at the writing desk by the balcony. A stack of postcards waited. Images of coral reefs, white sails, endless horizons. She began writing one card after another. The ocean looks exactly like freedom. Peace fits better than I thought it would. Inez, you'd laugh at how much I'm smiling. She paused, pen hovering over a final card addressed to Heather. Her hand hesitated. Then she wrote only 3 words. I'm not sorry. She didn't mail any of them. Instead, she lined them up in a row on the desk, like small, colorful confessions. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An email notification from Inez. The subject line read, "Voicemail from Heather." Curious, Carolyn pressed play. Heather's voice filled the quiet. Mom, I don't understand what you're doing. She's damaging Rachel's future. You can't let her throw everything away because you're angry. This isn't you. The message ended with a sharp inhale, the kind Heather always took when she wanted to say more, but refused to cry. Carolyn stared at the horizon for a long moment, the reflection of the water flickering against the glass. Then she typed a short reply. She already damaged mine. She hit send, then turned off her phone. That evening, she treated herself to a facial at the ship's spa. The technician wrapped her face in warm towels scented with orange, blossom, her hands gentle and rhythmic. Carolyn thought of nothing. Not bills, not the past, not the headlines about Queen Carolyn still circulating online. When she emerged, her skin glowed faintly in the soft hallway light. The sky outside had begun to melt into shades of amber and rose. She walked barefoot to the upper deck, just in time to see a pod of dolphins leaping through the waves alongside the ship. Their sleek bodies cut through the water in arcs of joy, wild and effortless. She leaned against the railing, smiling to herself. The wind tugged at her hair, and for a fleeting moment she wished someone could paint this exact second. Her, unburdened, watching freedom move. Beautiful, aren't they? Miles's voice came from behind her. He stood at the railing too, sleeves rolled up, champagne flute in hand. They are, she said. They don't seem to need anyone's approval to enjoy themselves. He chuckled. Neither do you, from what I've seen. Carolyn looked at him sidelong. That a compliment? Observation, he said. But if it helps, it's a flattering one. She laughed softly, the sound lost to the wind. They watched the dolphins disappear into the dusk before he turned toward her. There's something happening tonight. Private jazz set on the captain's deck. Not many guests, mostly the ones who don't post everything they see online. Selective company, she said. You've earned it, Miles replied. Come with me. She considered saying no, but the music drifting faintly from above, the low hum of a saxophone warming up, pulled at her. "Let me change," she said, smiling. "I'll meet you at the stairs in 10." He nodded, leaving her to the deepening twilight. Carolyn lingered a moment longer, watching the last trace of sun bleed into the horizon. The ocean, endless and gold, seemed to whisper back everything she'd forgotten to tell herself. Morning sunlight spilled through the porthole in golden bands. Carolyn stirred slowly, the echo of last night's jazz still thrumming softly in her chest. She stretched, savoring the lazy rhythm of a day with no obligations, no voices demanding something from her. When she finally picked up her phone, a single email waited. Subject line: verification required, parent signature discrepancy. Her eyebrows lifted. The sender was the financial aid office from Rachel's college. She opened it, scanning the text. "We've received a FAFSA submission on behalf of Rachel Lane, including parent verification. Unfortunately, the parent signature does not match our records. Please confirm your authorization." Carolyn stared at the screen, the faint hum of the ship around her growing sharper. For a moment she said nothing, then exhaled slowly, her smile thin and knowing. "Well," she murmured. "She's persistent." She slipped into a linen blouse, tied her hair back, and walked down to the business center on Deck 4. It was empty except for a single clerk behind the counter who greeted her with the soft politeness reserved for passengers who always knew exactly what they wanted. "Morning, ma'am. Need to print or fax?" "Both," Carolyn said, "and a notary if you've got one on board." The young man blinked, surprised. "A notary? I think we do, actually. Usually for travel insurance forms." "Perfect." She composed the letter herself at one of the small cubicles, typing carefully, each word deliberate. "To whom it may concern, I, Carolyn Lane, did not authorize or sign the parental verification submitted under my name for Rachel Lane's financial aid application. Please consider this my formal disavowal of that signature. Respectfully, Carolyn E. Lane." When she was done, she printed it on crisp white paper, signed with slow, steady strokes, and had the clerk stamp it with the ship's notary seal. "Do you want a confirmation page for the fax?" he asked. "Definitely," she said, and waited while the machine beeped and hummed. The first page slid through, followed by the confirmation slip. "Fax successful." Carolyn tucked the paper into her folder, her smile faint but satisfied. "Thank you," she told him. He returned her smile, clearly curious. "Everything okay, Ms. Lane?" "Better than okay," she said. "It's just paperwork catching up to reality." By afternoon, the ocean was calm enough to reflect the clouds like glass. Carolyn sat on the deck cafe with a lemonade, sunglasses perched on her nose, when her phone began to buzz again. Voicemail notifications, one after another. She knew before she listened. Rachel's voice crackled through the speaker. "You can't do this. They said the application's frozen until they investigate. Do you have any idea what that means for me? You're ruining everything." A pause. Then more shouting, words tumbling over one another, rage, disbelief, a plea buried somewhere underneath. Carolyn let it play, the sound tinny and frantic against the quiet sea. Then she deleted it, her thumb moving without hesitation. She wasn't angry, just done. That evening, Miles found her on the observation deck, watching the sun drop behind the horizon in a ribbon of orange fire. The air smelled of salt and distant rain. He carried 2 glasses of champagne and handed her one, condensation slick on the stem. "To another day in paradise," he said. She clinked her glass against his, smiling faintly. "To paperwork catching up to reality." He chuckled. "You say that like a woman who's just righted a lifetime of imbalance." "Maybe I have." He studied her face, the way the sunset painted it in amber light. "You're not the average retiree, Carolyn." She turned toward him, the corners of her mouth lifting. "No," she said softly, raising her glass again. "I'm not." They stood side by side, watching the last of the sun fade into the sea. The wind lifted her hair, and somewhere below, the ship's bell rang once, a low, resonant sound that carried across the water like punctuation. The last morning at sea rose in quiet shades of lavender and gold. The ship floated through a mirror of dawn, the world hushed but alive. Carolyn stood barefoot on the yoga deck, the air cool against her skin, a rolled mat under one arm. She hadn't planned to come. But when she passed the sign the night before, Sunrise Yoga, recenter before port, something in her had whispered, yes. Now, as the instructor's voice drifted over the soft music, she lifted her arms to the rising sun. The stretch pulled gently at her shoulders, her lungs filling with clean, salt-heavy air. Each inhale felt like rewriting herself, one quiet breath at a time. When the class ended, she lingered while others packed up. The sun was fully awake now, scattering light across the water. Her phone buzzed from the deck chair beside her, an unread message from Heather. She didn't open it. Instead, she typed her own and sent it without hesitation. Cut away. No greeting, no sign-off, just instruction. A boundary disguised as mercy. She watched the tiny delivered dot appear, then slipped her phone face down on the chair. Later, she wandered through the ship's boutique, the air-conditioned hum a contrast to the open sea. Glass cases gleamed with jewelry, bright, unnecessary luxuries. Her eyes caught on a coral pendant in the shape of a teardrop. The color was bold, unapologetic, like the Florida sunsets she used to watch from her kitchen window. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her palm. The clerk approached. "A gift?" Carolyn smiled faintly. "For myself." The woman nodded approvingly. "Those are the best kind." After lunch, she carried her drink to the upper deck, where a group of younger women were laughing by the railing, college age, sunburned, full of chatter. When they noticed her passing, one of them called out, "You're that woman, right? From the cruise posts? Queen Carolyn?" She laughed softly. "So they tell me." They made space, excited and curious. "Can we ask you something?" the boldest one said. "My mom still pays half my rent. She says it's because she loves me. My boyfriend says it's because she doesn't trust me. Who's right?" Carolyn tilted her head, considering. "Both." The girl frowned. "Then what should I do?" Carolyn took a sip of her lemonade, watching the horizon shimmer. "Don't co-sign your regrets," she said. The group went quiet for a moment, the words sinking in like stones into water. Then they smiled, as if they understood. Maybe not fully, but enough. Back in her suite, the room felt brighter than usual. The orchids on the table were still fresh, the air carrying a faint trace of orange blossom from her robe. She sat at the desk, the coral pendant now resting against her throat, cool and steady. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Inez. "You got mail. Want me to open?" Carolyn smiled. "Sure." A minute later, her phone pinged again, a photo attached. It showed a white envelope with Rachel's name across the top, the college logo in the corner. The flap was torn halfway open. Inside, the first line was visible. "We're pleased to inform you of your acceptance." Inez's text followed. Guess she got in. Didn't even open it. Carolyn stared at the photo. For a moment, she felt a twinge of something. Sorrow, pride. She couldn't quite tell. Then it passed. She typed back, "Some doors we choose not to walk through." She set the phone down beside the coral pendant's box. Outside, gulls circled the ship's wake, white flashes against the endless blue. The sea kept moving, tireless and sure. That evening, as the ship turned toward port, Carolyn stood at her balcony, wind in her hair, the horizon fading from gold to violet. Somewhere deep in the hull, she could feel the faint, steady rhythm of engines pushing forward. Forward. Always forward. Clear waters shimmered in late morning heat when Carolyn stepped off the shuttle and onto familiar pavement. The salt air smelled different here. Less promise, more memory. Her suitcase rolled behind her like a shadow she no longer needed to drag. She'd slept soundly in her own bed the night before, but the house felt altered. The silence she'd once feared was now an old friend. She moved through it with quiet purpose, opening windows, letting in the Gulf breeze. Then she dressed in crisp linen, slipped on the coral pendant, and drove to the lawyer's office. The building was modest, white stucco, an American flag fluttering from the awning. Carolyn had been here only once before, after her husband's passing. Back then, she'd been small in her grief, content to sign whatever line they pointed to. This time, she arrived early and carried her own folder. "Mrs. Lane," the receptionist greeted. "Mr. Dwyer's expecting you." He was already standing when she entered his office. "Carolyn," he said warmly. "It's been a while. How's retirement treating you?" She smiled. "Surprisingly well." He gestured to the leather chair. "What can I do for you today?" Carolyn placed the folder on his desk, her movements deliberate. "I need to make revisions to my will." "Of course." He adjusted his glasses. "Additions or removals?" "Removals," she said, her tone even. "Two names, Rachel Lane and Heather Lane." He blinked, then cleared his throat. "Understood." "And the new beneficiaries?" She opened the folder, revealing neatly typed notes and a handwritten letter. "I want to set aside a portion, 20,000, to create a scholarship fund for women over 40 returning to school. Adult education, community college level." Mr. Dwyer nodded, jotting notes. "That's a meaningful gesture." "The rest," she continued, "I'm leaving to Inez Navarro, my neighbor. She's been my true, constant." He smiled faintly. "She'll be touched." Carolyn slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "And this should be attached as an addendum." He turned it in his hands. "What is it?" "A voucher," she said. "Another cruise I won in a raffle. The envelope says, 'Use it when you're tired of giving.' That's for Inez, too." His smile grew. "A poetic legacy." "I like clarity," she replied. He nodded, typing quietly while she reviewed the papers. The rhythmic click of keys filled the room, a sound she'd come to associate with finality. When the documents were ready, he turned them toward her. "Everything as you outlined." Carolyn signed each page in steady, deliberate pen strokes. She could feel the old life falling away with every line, the weight of expectation, the endless debt of motherhood she'd never agreed to carry. When it was done, Mr. Dwyer handed her the notarized copy. "You're certain about all this?" She met his gaze. "I've never been more certain." He nodded once, respectfully. "Then congratulations, Carolyn. You've just written your own piece." At the bank that afternoon, Dee looked up from her desk and broke into a surprised grin. "Back from paradise already?" Carolyn smiled. "Paradise has good Wi-Fi. Life doesn't." They both laughed. "What brings you in today?" Dee asked. "I need to open a new account, joint, with no heirs. Just me." Dee blinked. "You sure?" "Most people at your stage." "I'm not most people," Carolyn said, her voice soft but firm. Dee smiled, recognizing the edge beneath the calm. "All right then. One independent account, no beneficiaries." When the paperwork was done, Carolyn tucked the debit card into her wallet. The plastic still smelled faintly of ink. Freedom, in a way, had a scent. By sunset, she was home again. The sky over the Gulf was a bruise of violet and rose. Inez dropped by with a casserole and her usual laughter. "Back to land and already rearranging your life?" Inez teased. Carolyn poured 2 glasses of wine. "Rearranging implies it was fine before." They sat on the porch as the cicadas started their chorus. Inez sipped her wine, then pulled an envelope from her bag. "You got something certified today. Came to my box by mistake." Carolyn glanced at the return address, Rachel's college. "Probably more fallout," she said, setting it aside. But an ocean away, Rachel Lane sat in her tiny off-campus apartment, face pale under the glow of her laptop. The same school logo graced the letter she was holding, this one addressed to her. "Dear Ms. Lane, we are writing to inform you that your recent financial aid application has been suspended pending investigation for fraudulent parent verification. You are advised to respond immediately to avoid formal reporting." Rachel read it twice before the words began to blur. Outside her window, a lawnmower droned on, indifferent to her panic. She reached for her phone, then stopped. For the first time, she didn't know who to call. Back in Clearwater, Carolyn watched the last slice of sun vanish behind the palms. She lifted her glass to the horizon. "Here's to honesty," she said quietly. "Eventually, it reaches everyone." The news cycle moved on, as they always do. One week, Queen Carolyn had been a folk hero of quiet rebellion, an internet legend in linen. By the next, her story had slipped beneath the tide. What remained was cleaner, smaller, a life she finally recognized as her own. Rachel's online pages went silent first. No more rants, no vague posts about injustice, no new selfies under the ring light. Heather followed not long after, her profile now a polite grid of office updates and dog pictures. Nothing personal, nothing pointed. For the first time in years, Carolyn's phone stayed still. No buzzing, no apologies disguised as guilt, no interruptions at all. Instead, her mornings began with coffee on the porch and a laptop open to a different kind of noise. She had joined a private Facebook group called Women Who Sail Late. The banner showed a row of sun hats against an endless horizon. The members were retired teachers, widows, nurses, and women who had spent lifetimes cleaning up after others before learning how to float. When she uploaded her first post, a photo of her standing beside the ship's captain, coral pendant gleaming in the sun, the comments poured in. "You look free. That smile says everything. Tell us how it feels." Carolyn typed back simply, "Like the world stopped asking for explanations." She closed the laptop and laughed softly. The air outside carried the faint hiss of waves, as if the Gulf itself approved. A week later, Inez hosted her annual barbecue, an event Carolyn had often helped with in years past. This time, she was told firmly to just show up. The backyard smelled of charcoal and citrus marinade. A dozen neighbors gathered under the string lights, laughter rising above the music of an old blues playlist. Inez wore her favorite apron, "Kiss the cook or don't, I'm busy," and grinned when she spotted Carolyn stepping through the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Inez announced, clinking her spatula against a beer bottle, "our guest of honor, retired, renewed, and way more famous than the rest of us combined." Carolyn blushed, waving her hand. "Please, that was last month's gossip." "Good gossip has legs," Inez said, handing her a glass of sangria. "Here's to the woman who finally cashed out her patience." Laughter rippled through the yard. Someone turned up the music, and the night settled into easy rhythm, meat sizzling, kids splashing in the pool, stars rising slow over the palms. Carolyn sat near the edge of the deck, the scent of grilled corn and salt air wrapping around her like memory made bearable. At one point, Inez leaned close and said quietly, "You know, that scholarship, of yours? They sent something today." Carolyn raised an eyebrow. "Already?" Inez handed her a thin white envelope, edges still crisp. Carolyn opened it carefully, her fingers steady. Inside was a typed letter with a university crest at the top. "Dear Mrs. Lane, On behalf of Clearwater Community College, we wish to thank you for your generous establishment of the Carolyn Lane Resilient Scholarship for Women Returning to Education. Your contribution will immediately support 3 recipients this term. With gratitude, Dean Francis Cooper. Behind the letter were 3 handwritten notes on lined paper, each in a different hand. The first: I thought I was too old to start over. Your gift made me reconsider. The second: I'll be the first in my family to finish. Thank you for seeing women like me. The third, shaky but confident: I waited 53 years to believe I was worth the effort. Carolyn folded them back into the envelope, blinking once against the evening light. Inez smiled knowingly. Feels different when giving isn't expected, huh? Carolyn nodded. It feels real? Later, when the guests had gone and the yard had quieted to the hum of night insects, Carolyn carried her glass down to the small dock that stretched behind Inez's yard. The bay was still, its surface catching the moonlight like polished glass. She sat in an old wicker chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her. The coral pendant glowed faintly against her chest, catching every bit of starlight it could. The night smelled of seaweed and jasmine, a scent she'd always loved. Somewhere in the distance, a boat engine hummed, a low, steady sound fading toward the horizon. She thought about the letters, about the women whose names she didn't know yet, about Rachel and Heather, somewhere out there, building whatever versions of the future they could afford. For the first time, Carolyn didn't feel responsible for how their stories would end. The morning light poured across the kitchen like honey. Carolyn stood by the open suitcase on the table, small, floral, light. She'd packed it the night before but was double-checking now, not out of worry but satisfaction. A linen sundress, 2 paperbacks, a sun hat that still smelled faintly of salt, and the coral pendant gleaming atop it all. It wasn't armor in the heavy sense. It didn't guard her from anything. It simply reminded her of what she no longer owed. The house hummed in quiet approval. Windows open, curtains stirring in the Gulf breeze, everything in its place. On the counter sat a single sticky note, its yellow square bright against the wood. In her careful script, she wrote, "Gone sailing. Don't wait up." No punctuation. It didn't need any. She pressed it to the doorframe and stepped back. It looked right, like punctuation at the end of a long, complicated sentence she'd finally finished writing. The taxi pulled up to the curb, tires crunching softly on the gravel. Inez came out onto her porch in her robe, coffee mug in hand. "You're actually doing it again," she said, smiling into the morning light. Carolyn laughed. "The sea missed me." "The sea," Inez said, "and maybe a certain silver-haired cruise agent." Carolyn rolled her eyes, though she didn't deny it. "He's just part of the view." Inez grinned, raising her mug. "Then go get your view, Queen Carolyn." Carolyn closed her suitcase and gave her friend a long, easy look, the kind that said everything a goodbye didn't need to. "I'll bring you back something sparkly," she promised. "You already did," Inez said, nodding toward the coral pendant. "It suits you." Carolyn touched it lightly. "It's mine this time." The taxi driver loaded her bag into the trunk. As Carolyn slid into the back seat, Inez called after her, "Don't answer your phone, no matter who it is." Carolyn laughed through the open window. "That's the plan." The door closed with a soft thud. Inez waved from the porch as the car rolled down the street, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror until the palms swallowed her whole. At the marina, the ship waited, white and immense against the blue. The sun was already high, glinting off the water, the same water that had started this entire undoing. Miles was there again, leaning casually near the gangway, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses in the other. He looked up, smiled, and shook his head. "You again." "Me again," Carolyn said, handing him her ticket. He scanned it, then glanced at her. "Different destination this time?" "Same ocean," she said, Different direction. He grinned. You know, most people don't come back so soon. I'm not most people, she said. He chuckled. You really aren't. As she stepped aboard, the ship's horn gave a long, deep call that vibrated through her chest. The dock began to shrink behind her, and with it, everything she'd already survived. In her cabin, Carolyn unpacked slowly, the small ritual soothing. The pendant caught the afternoon light as she hung it back around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin, but she could feel its steady weight. Quiet, sure, her own. She placed her books on the nightstand and drew a slim leather-bound journal from her tote. The first few pages were filled with short notes, observations from her last voyage, fragments of thoughts she hadn't been ready to speak. She turned to a fresh page. The paper smelled faintly of ink and sea air. Her pen hovered for a moment, then began to move in neat, deliberate strokes. This time, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the anchor. She smiled as she reread it, then closed the journal and rested her hand on the cover. Outside, the ocean stretched open and endless. Carolyn walked to the balcony as the ship turned toward the horizon. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Below, the waves churned and sparkled, erasing the shoreline inch by inch until all that was left was blue. The pendant glowed warm against her chest, the sound of the sea filling the space where old memories used to live. She lifted her face to the wind, a small, content smile pulling at her mouth. She called me broke and quiet, and I spent her future dancing,